Holy cow. Did you catch the drama in that Ohio courtroom as the prosecutor stormed out when the judge considered a motion that dismisses charges against Matthew Moore in the staged murder of his wife?
The court is now prepared to render its decision.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I would object to going forward anyway right now without the elected county prosecutor who's on this case.
But she chose not to be here.
That's not accurate, Judge.
Okay, okay, your objection's noted.
We had a phone status conference 2 weeks ago in which Ms. Schiffel...
Your objection is noted. Okay?
I'm not going to participate in this proceeding without the elected county prosecutor. I think this is a sham that you're going forward. When the court was...
You're going to sit here. You're going to sit here.
You were told about her unavailability and specifically told her on the phone not to cancel that appointment, that it wouldn't be a problem.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you want to be here for the decision, that's your business.
Well, Your Honor, I think this is outrageous. You're going forward without the prosecutor.
While the prosecutor was calling the judge's efforts a sham, another murder case was getting underway in what people are calling Ohio's biggest, most complex murder case in history. It was the murder of 8 people in the Pike County massacre. And folks, it's time for this week's crime recap on Profiling Evil. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this segment of Profiling Evil. I hope you're going to take a minute and hit that like and subscribe button and make sure that you're sharing our channel with your friends. Now, listen, this has been a busy week, and I've had a bunch of appearances on Court TV, not only in the Matthew Moore murder trial, but in the Ohio Pike County massacre trial. 8 people were murdered there. So let's start there. This case rolls back to the horrible discovery of the Roden family, a group of 8 people who were murdered in one night. It happened over 4 homes, and 3 of the homes were really close to each other, within minutes apart, but one was about 7 miles away. Now, the accused killers are estranged in-laws to the Rodens. They're called the Wagners, and I'll tell you what, this one is going to have your blood boiling and the hair on the back of your neck curling. It happened on April 21st over to the 22nd in 2016. And it would take police nearly 2 years to file charges against George Billy Wagner IV, George Wagner III, Rita Newcomb, and Edward Jake Wagner. Newcomb and Jake Wagner have been convicted, and they've turned state's evidence, proving that families that slay people together aren't going to be staying together. Now, the murders occurred on the night of April 21st and 22nd, 2016, when 8 members of the Roden family were executed one by one in their homes. And this one is really intriguing because some had multiple gunshot wounds in specific areas. Others had single shots. This thing is really an interesting case, but it was an execution-style killing of all 8 people. Now, you might be wondering how they got away with shooting one person after another. And as you dig into this case and learn about the silencers they were building and other efforts they made, it's going to start making more sense. The connection between these 2 families, that really is interesting because it goes back to illegal cockfighting and narcotic trafficking enterprises. But the real reason these murders happened is that Wagner's son, Jake, and a child, the Roden family daughter named Hannah, had a child together. Now, Jake allegedly sexually assaulted the girl. Now, the estranged families, the Wagners, wanted that child in their family, but the Rodens wouldn't hear anything of it. So in the wacky mind of the Wagners, they decided that murder was the only way that they could get the baby, and they set out on a many, many months, I think 4-month planning session, where they purchased vehicle, clothing, shoes, things that they were going to use in the murder, something they could dispose of later and not be tied to them. But cops linked it together. They purchased ammunition. They built silencers for the weapons, and they practiced their murders to ensure that their plan was going to work. What's more spooky is they purchased brass collectors. It's something that collects the brass as it's ejected from the weapon when it's fired. That ensures that there's no forensic evidence left behind. But it didn't stop there. They colluded as a family regarding how they were going to commit these murders, and they pored over house and attack plans that they documented on paper. And then they acted it out, killing all 8 people.
911. Yes, I need to get the 40. Let's go. Hold on. I need you to tell me the address. What's the address? Give me just a second. We walked to the mailbox. I think my brother-in-law's dead. Okay, what's the address? Give me just a second. 4077 Union Hill Road. 4077. 4077. Okay, 4077 Union Hill, correct? Yes, 4077 Union Hill Road. Ma'am, you gotta tell me what's going on. There's blood all over the house. Okay. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom. It looks like someone has beat the hell out of him. Okay. There's blood all over the front room. Ma'am, can you tell me what county that's in? Is it Pike County? It's Pike County? Yes, and they drug him in the bedroom. Okay. I need you to get out of the house. Did you drive over there? Yes, I did. Okay, what's your name? Mine's Bobby. Bobby? What's your brother-in-law's name? Huh? What's your brother-in-law's name? Ma'am? Yeah. What's his name? Chris Roden and Gary Roden. Chris and Gary Roden? Both of them that looks like they're dead. You think they're both dead? I think they're both dead. Looks like someone has beat the out of them. Okay. Is there anybody else in the house? Not that I know of. Okay. The doors was locked when we got here, but I know where the key was at. And I went in, and they were laying on the floor. Okay. Bobby, I need you to get out of the house and wait. I'm done out. Okay? I'm standing outside right now. Okay. Just stay out of the house. Don't let anybody go in there, okay? Yeah. All right. We got deputies on the way, okay? Thank you. You're welcome.
Leaving 3 young children, including an infant, at the crime scene alive. And if you dig into that infant and the story of how police found that infant, I think you're going to be shocked and so saddened. Now, I'd encourage you to check this case out. You can find all kinds of information online, including some of my court TV interviews. So let's take a moment right now and listen to one exchange that I had with Vinnie Politan last night on the case. Vinnie asked me about the evidence, so let's listen in.
Joining us now in Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Mike, your thoughts about what happened? 4 crime scenes, 8 bodies, this investigation, and putting all of these pieces together.
I think we're going to see the prosecution lay this thing out. And as we look at the public information that's been available, I'm starting to create a picture in my mind. I mean, it is clear that there was a great deal of planning in this homicide and mass shooting, or in reality, spree shooting, where he moved from one, or this group moved from one victim to the next. I think it's really going to be interesting to see the information that the prosecution exposes in the trial about the preparation that went into this thing, the clothing that was purchased beforehand and used in the homicides, the ammunition, the components to build silencer devices for the weapons, the practicing that went on. And I say that, Vinny, because we know that law enforcement was out cutting pieces of tree apart, taking bullet fragments where they were practicing on the properties that the suspect family owns. They are collecting that information so that they can analyze those bullet fragments against bullet fragments recovered at the crime scenes and in the bodies. And that's going to be really important. I think it's interesting to learn that the suspects in this case apparently purchased equipment to capture the brass as it ejects from the weapon that's being fired, to keep that from being found at the crime scene. And was it that effective? Did they in fact find some brass? So that's something I'm really looking forward to see. But all of that gives us this indication of an incredible amount pre-planning, premeditation. We know that there were precipitating things that happened with the first child and the relationship falling apart. The second child, where for some reason Wagner wanted that child put in his name and Hannah refused to do that. And then, of course, whether or not the Facebook ad kind of forces the family's hand, but we can see this dynamic happening in the family and every other decision they're making. And was it all part of this conspiratory act? And I think we're going to see that unfold. And then, holy cow, the evidence at the crime scene, thousands and thousands of pieces of evidence that were collected in those 4 separate crime scenes. And will it methodically show us how they moved from each location to the next and systematically executed those victims? Because that's what it appears to happen. And why on earth were some shot multiple times, others shot only in certain regions of the body and other places? And the behavior that we're going to learn about here and the relationships with each victim and the suspect family are going to tell us a lot about those bullet wounds. I think this whole thing is going to really paint a picture behaviorally that shows not only premeditation, if everything we're reading is accurate, but it's going to show what the mindset was and how in their wacky minds they thought they were going to get away with this.
This was a brutal, cold, and calculated series of murders, and each victim, again, folks, was systematically executed. Thankfully, the state took the surviving children into protective custody and didn't return them to the Wagner home. The funeral proceedings shook the entire state, and many of us around the world are now just learning more about this case. Jake Wagner stated that all he ever wanted was, quote, a happy home life, something to keep his young family together and to see his daughter grow up safe and happy, close quote. Well, instead, when this guy's fantasies didn't work out, he joined his family in planning and executing these people. Just before he was let out of the courtroom after pleading guilty, Jake Wagner said to the judge, "I'm guilty, Your Honor." He then looked over at the Roden family members and said, quote, "I'm deeply and very sorry." Well, folks, is that enough?
Mike King, host of Profiling Evil. I keep saying that because I think of this story. It is evil.
Yeah, I mean, this thing is going to boil down to the testimony of 2 participants in the planning, the execution, and then trying to get away with this thing. And that's going to be really hard to overcome. This family that somehow slays together didn't stay together at the end, and that's going to pay really big dividends for the prosecution, I believe.
This case isn't over. 2 more members of the Wagners are facing murder charges still. Jake's mother has been sentenced to 30 years in a plea deal, and Jake, he's going to spend the rest of his life, plus several hundred more years behind bars. So here's my question for you. What are your thoughts on this case? How are you feeling about this one? Did you know about it? I'm going to be watching for your comments down below, and I'm hoping that you'll take time to respond to each other. But for now, let's return to the Matthew Moore murder trial. This is the one I started out with. Hey everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil. I've been studying criminal behavior for more than 40 years, and one of my favorite research tools is Truth Finder. It's online, and you're not going to believe the information stored there. So if you want to know more about that new neighbor, your babysitter, or your next online date, give Truth Finder a try. I'm including a link below with special discount pricing. You got to click the link to get it and then enter EVIL10 at checkout. We're an affiliate, which means we get a small commission, enough to buy a small Diet Dr. Pepper, but you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening today. Moore is accused of murdering his wife, Emily Noble. If you didn't catch my video last week, go back and watch it. It gives you a little more information on it. The state rested their case yesterday, and prosecutor Mark Sleeper wrapped up his circumstantial murder case. In the closing arguments before the trial was turned over to the defense, Sleeper laid out the state's evidence, focusing on how long it takes to manually strangle someone. When he was going through this, Moore was visibly shaken by the arguments. He could be seen breathing heavily, blinking rapidly, and squirming in his chair. And as the heat turned up, especially at the point when they're really talking about this murder, you can see him showing some frustration. Now, I have a buddy in the courtroom who texted me, and he said that he didn't think the state was proving the case, that Moore was actually the killer. Watch this short exchange where Moore appears to be pretty dang frustrated with his defense counsel because it doesn't appear they're objecting to the prosecution's delivery. It's clear this guy's not happy, and it gives us a little insight into him.
This is a staged suicide scene. Who on planet Earth would have an incentive to stage a suicide other than the defendant? Random, unknown suspect, the Westerville strangler who's manually strangling women in the woods, wouldn't take the time, the effort, the care to stage a suicide. What would be the point? Who else, a random other individual, would have the tools and the items nearby or ready at hand in order to stage a suicide?
Now, let's get back to where we started this video. The court's decision on whether the states met the burden and can hold Moore for murder. Remember, the defense last night asked the judge to dismiss the charges against Moore. I'm going to let you watch the entire exchange at the end of this video, and I want to thank my friends at Court TV for letting me share this. But before I do, folks, please take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button. Take a moment and check out our channel memberships too. For those of you who are helping us out financially, it's really appreciated. And the new Academy series, Series 2, is going to launch next week. So I hope you're signing up and taking advantage of it. It's the only place you're going to see those videos first. Hey, share Profiling Evil with your friends. And remember, you can find Profiling Evil on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you like podcasts, you can get Profiling Evil on your favorite podcast platform. And check us out on the World Wide Web at profilingevil.com. Hey, thanks for listening, folks, and we'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.
All right, we are on the record outside the presence of the jury, all parties, well, at least several of the parties representing counsel on both sides are present, and the defendant is present. Last night, a motion was made for Rule 29. The court heard arguments, and the court is now prepared to render its decision.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I would object to going forward anyway right now without the elected county prosecutor who's on this case.
But she chose not to be here.
That's not accurate, Judge.
Okay, okay, your objection's noted.
We had a phone status conference 2 weeks ago in which Ms. Schiffel...
Your objection is noted. Okay?
I'm not going to participate in this proceeding without the elected county prosecutor. I think this is a sham that you're going forward. When the court was...
You're going to sit here. You're going to sit here.
You were told about her unavailability and specifically told her on the phone not to cancel that appointment, that it wouldn't be a problem.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you want to be here for the decision, that's your business.
Well, Your Honor, I think this is outrageous. You're going forward without the prosecutor.
I've prepared my remarks and my decision here today. And I am, I am glad I had the opportunity to spend the night to do some deliberation on this matter and think about it. But I want to kind of begin with a sidebar before I go to the motion itself. And it's an apology I'm going to make to the defense team here. Before you made your motion, I made a few statements that were probably an effort at humor, but I think they could have been interpreted as intemperate, unnecessary, or perhaps even offensive. And that was certainly not my intention. And I likewise did not in any way try to imply that your motion was simply a matter of the record and an administrative act and perhaps without merit. And I say that not only because that wasn't my intention, but your arguments were well-spoken, compelling, well done, and very professional. And in fact, I want to say that both lawyers have been professional throughout this entire case. So you're the kind of lawyers that any judge would want on his or her docket trying a case. And I want you to know that. And I regret a lack of reciprocal professionalism for that moment there. And I wanted you to know how I felt. And I wanted to share that with you. It's not reflective, I hope, of who I am. Thank you. The court, as I said, has had an opportunity to consider this case for a significant period of time last night. And I note that in my 20 years, both as a sitting judge and a visiting judge, I have rendered decisions on Rule 29 motions in every criminal case, and I've denied those motions and I have granted those motions. But I think I can say this has been the most difficult motion for me to consider. And again, I'm glad I had the time to reflect upon the arguments made by counsel. And I think probably one of the reasons it's difficult is that both the state and the defense have made very compelling and good arguments. Perhaps it's more the state of the evidence presented that I'm working with that I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about. I want to begin this decision by saying what is not a part of the court's consideration. I am not judging the credibility of any of the witnesses who testified, nor giving weight to any of the witnesses, nor in any way whatsoever injecting my personal opinion, if any, as to what I would think the state of the evidence is. I am certainly not considering this case on the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. As we all know, the standard is to look at the evidence in the light most favorable to the state without any of those other considerations. And the court has done so, and my job, if you will, is to determine whether or not there's evidence in which jurors could come to even different conclusions, but one which would be a decision in favor of the state. Now, I have already indicated, and I reaffirm at this point in time, that the state has amply satisfied its burden in regard to the motion, in regard to the establishment of this being a homicide and a staged suicide. With that determination, following that, a vast majority, if not the great majority of the elements of murder, both purposeful murder and felony murder, as well as felonious assault, are satisfied by that finding by itself. The issue that's primarily before the court is the question of the identification of the perpetrator who has committed this homicide and staged suicide from the evidence. What probably has made this case most difficult is that there is no direct evidence establishing the defendant as the perpetrator in this case. Now, the state is not legally required to do that, but it does enhance the decision process at this time to be more circumspect. Clearly, as the state has acknowledged as well, that circumstantial evidence is the cornerstone of this case. And the inference reasonably raised from the evidence that in a natural and logical way would follow and according to the common experience of mankind as to what those inferences are drawn from direct evidence is what the court must look at. And I think consistent with the requirement that the court look at the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, the court must also look at the inferences in the light most favorable to the state. So, the court has considered the circumstantial evidence provided. The state has, I believe, and perhaps a bit ironically, established the question of motive. The defendant is married to the deceased. The evidence is presented that they've had chats and messages to each other that have been classified as difficult, argumentative, including one not to each other, but one on May 7th where the defendant declared that his marriage was over. Evidence that 2 weeks prior to the argument, there was testimony that there was a very loud argument in their garage. Statements made that are inconsistent with some of the facts determined by law enforcement, and misstatements or even lies made to police. And of course, evidence in regard to the argument that Mr. Moore made statements in the past tense, which inferentially is that the speaker would have known that even though the deceased was not discovered, she was not going to be discovered alive. This kind of is the evidence that demonstrates that the defendant could very well have been unhappy and angry with his wife, and the behavior after he reported her missing could circumstantially infer that he knew something that he was not telling the police. The state also presented evidence, largely through the digital forensic evaluation of the defendant's cell phone, which, as we all know, reflects the usage activity and non-user activity of the phones, that reflected for approximately 3.5 hours on the evening of May 24th and the morning of May 25th that there was no activity for which time period any acts of the defendant were unaccounted for. Now again, several inferences may be drawn from that, certainly, but the inference most favorable to the state is that he could very well have been engaged in the conduct that resulted in the demise of his wife. The argument presented by the state, based upon the evidence presented in its totality, is that, again, under the rule, the court has made the finding that this was a homicide and staged suicide from the evidence, in the view most favored to the state. And the question raised from that evidence, by working from that, is who would be a perpetrator, who would take the time and necessity not only of ending the life of an individual, but taking the effort to stage it so it would appear to be a suicide. Now, we obviously know, and the evidence reflects, that within 48 hours, the police provided the Miranda rights to the defendant. So he certainly began this case as a person of interest upon whom suspicion would fall, and that's virtually the case every time when a spouse is missing or is found to be a victim of a homicide. Certainly, circumstantially, based upon that evidence, based upon the conclusion that the court's finding that this is a homicide and staged suicide, is also rather consistent with the thought that the evidence provided the fact that suicide over a significant period of time has affected the difficulty in the lives of both the defendant and his wife, which likewise has a bearing upon why that could very well have been staged by her husband. Again, at this time, considering all of this evidence, And in light of what the court has preliminarily addressed regarding the nature of the court's decision, I find at this time that taken in total, the state has met its threshold burden to allow this matter to be considered by the jury, and thus the Rule 29 motion presented timely at the close of the state's case will not be granted. The court will simply state for the record at this time, and particularly since we are coming to the close of the state's case due to our unique agreed circumstances, that the court on its own motion is going to take under advisement a Rule 29 motion at the conclusion of all of the state's presentation of evidence, and will proceed accordingly.